Frank, we are all good to go.
We're all good? Okay, thank you. I'd like to call to order the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, July 30th, 2020, 1:30 p.m. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Going on to agenda item 2, which is agenda revisions. Kathy, is there any revisions to this meeting do you know of?
No.
Okay. Go on to introductions. We'd like to have anybody new with us? Okay.
No one is new.
Thank you. At this time, this is a public meeting. Is there any public comments from anybody who has joined in on Zoom?
Any announcements from anybody?
Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the minutes. We need to approve the minutes of the April 30th, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion and a second? I need a motion and a second from anybody.
I'd make a motion to approve those minutes.
Okay, and a second, Keith. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Opposed? Hearing none. Minutes are approved.
Frank, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Please.
If you're okay with it, I think I'm just going to unmute everybody
Sure.
and they can self-mute after that. But I also wanted to announce that just a reminder that the chat boxes are also recorded. So if you choose to chat with us or somebody else, that information is being preserved in sunshine. And if you choose to remain muted, a quick, easy way to talk if you just want to say something really quick is to use your space bar on your keyboard. If you're muted and you depress that, hold it down, talk, and let it go like a walkie-talkie.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. Ready to move on to agenda item 5, old business, and part A to start, which will be 2021 small grant program application and funding criteria. I think this is something we had talked about before when we were grading the last small grants, and really where do we want to go with these grants in the future. So open, Kayleen, we're open for discussion on that.
Yeah, we unfortunately we didn't receive, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we didn't receive a whole lot of responses. I'm trying to pull it up right now. Hang on 1 second. I did receive a couple afterwards. Sorry, I thought I had it open.
Okay.
Too many things open is probably the problem. There it is. Okay. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yeah,
You're going to have to make it bigger, I think.
I got it. It comes up good on mine.
How's that?
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, so this is literally all that I received. And Keith, thank you for giving me yours twice. I captured them the first time. I just forgot to let you know I got them. And I had also received 2 more comments after the fact, and one of them from Greg Braun, and one from Dr. Cox. And I'll read those to you guys kind of quickly because it kind of fits in with just about everything that's in here. Greg says it troubles him that this year we ended up contributing to several projects that were going to move forward regardless of our contribution, while other smaller projects that really needed our support to move forward were not funded. I'm not sure how to deal with this in the future, but perhaps creating a ranking criteria that would allow us to see and weigh the percentage of the overall project budget for each specific project that we would be funding would help us understand how important our contribution is to the implementation of the project. And then Dr. Cox also added, from our experience with the last set of applications, and I know it is something that the committee has talked about, that is the multiple projects for the one day in the life of the lagoon. Is there a way to develop a single category or pot of money for these multiple projects? There is a real variety of quality for the applications, and maybe we can come up with a standard application form for this project if Ms. Weiss and Orca are going to promote this project in 2021. If need be, maybe we can get a Treasure Coast Grant Foundation to pay for this one project. Say set up a pot of $75,000 to be shared by the schools taking part, and let there be a small grants program for all manner of other projects.
Well, one concern I had, as the money grows, so has the number of applicants who have applied. Seems like each year that number continues to get bigger. So what is a small grants program? What do we want the small grants program to be? I'm just playing the devil through this conversation. Do we want it to fund a university who generally has funding for projects, or do we want to fund projects that are more oriented towards community, teaching people how to be better stewards of the lagoon, the education part, maybe the schools and so forth? Where is that money best used to promote the lagoon? So, you know, I know when we were going through and we were ranking things, and I talked to Dwayne a lot on it, and I think I talked to you guys a lot on it. And what is a small grants program? You know, how do we want to label it, and who should apply, and who are we really, not that we don't want to help, but where is this small pot of money best used to get the most out of the program?
And I don't know how to raise my hand. Usually there's a raise your hand thing. I don't see it.
Could be at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I don't see it today.
But you're on anyway.
Frank,
Just that.
I agree with you 100%. I thought that was our core issue. And my suggestion, I don't see it on the screen here, was we limit small grants to what I'm calling small organizations. And that could fall into two categories. Either organizations that are completely volunteers or have, let's say, one employee maximum, or larger organizations whose primary role is not lagoon conservation, like schools. I have no problem with schools applying. But I really just thought anyone who has a large presence, including the zoo, we should not be applying in this funding thing. It should be for not-for-profits that are, you know, that are all volunteer run. So I think it would make sense limiting who can apply, eligibility. Universities should not, you know, any environmental group that has an active working staff should not. I think it should be really almost grassroots, and I think we could define that somehow by saying, you know, again, number of full-time employees or part-time employees, and or this is not your primary thing. So if we have a business that's a bigger business, but this is a sideline, potentially they could do it like a school. So that was my thought. I agree with you 100%. That I saw was no problem. So.
James?
Well, I think one of the things that definitely would improve it is if all of the day in the life schools were considered as one.
Yeah.
That would reduce the large number by a substantial percentage. I agree that an organization should probably apply once. I'll use FIT as an example. But you know, it's quite likely and probable that a school is going to have students who are proposing a project, not necessarily the school, and I would not want to see that being precluded.
Jim, I think the schools would have to sign off on that because they would be the recipient. We can't pay a student for a project or a
Right.
student organization. We would have to pay the school. And so the school would have to agree that they would allow the project and accept the project and accept the funding.
Mm-hmm.
So the schools really do have to be the applicant.
But
Anybody else?
is there any reason that we can't use the day in the life as one block?
We could, but remember that if it's one block, it would be one grant. So they would only be eligible for $5,000.
Right.
And
Well,
and let me say this about day in the life, so we don't have to belabor this. Dwayne and I have been talking about perhaps offering a separate RFP, and you guys can weigh in on this. We don't know whether it's a good idea as yet, but if we were to offer a separate RFP that would be for a citizen science type of project like Day in the Life, it would only be for projects that are established now. So you can't develop a project that would be a citizen science project. It would have to be an ongoing project where you've done it in the past and you're going to continue doing it in the future. So we would, by writing it that way, we would be discouraging people just chasing money and developing a new project. So it would, the people who would be eligible are those who already have citizen science projects going. And then it could be a larger sum of money that would support a project like Day in the Life. So is that enough of an idea for you to weigh in on, or do I need to clarify a little more? I don't think we've gone any further with it.
It precludes using small grants as seed money, though, which I think is kind of a bummer.
Seed money to who? Universities, groups, seed money to schools?
To innovative concepts in citizen science.
But could that include FIT, Harbor Branch, organizations like that, MRC? Or are you including them in this?
No, well, I think that would be sort of one of the weaknesses in that, all of those organizations are actually looking for money to do innovative projects, and certainly individuals that are members of those organizations are looking for a way to fund something different. I think that the not-for-profits are all of us looking for money.
Again, it wasn't, I'm just throwing things out there just to help make the conversation.
I think it's worth having the conversation. I wonder whether, having only turn dirt larger projects and projects that are underway isn't really stifling innovation and new ideas. And I feel as though we need some new, fresh ideas. And that's what the small grants program might most ideally be set up to fund.
Keith?
Yeah.
You want to propose your comment here?
Yeah, well, I just want to reframe for a second. I think I don't know if we have a solution, but this were the two problems that I saw. If we can agree on the problems, then staff can come up with a solution. The two problems was some sort of dedicated funding stream or RFP for a Day in the Life, because we saw all these and I think it's great. And I just don't think, I think it was hard to handle under the current small thing. And the other problem I saw were big organizations trying to take little bite-sized pieces out of the small grants program. And I don't think that was the intention. So if we identify that we want something that works for Day in Life better and something that really limits, and I think small grants should be limited to sort of more grassroots. Again, I defined it as either groups that don't primarily do conservation, but are trying to here, a homeowner association, or a really little not-for-profit grassroots environmental group. If we define those as the two problems, so that means we get the universities, we get the zoos, we get a bunch of people out of this pot of money into the other pots of money where probably they're better served. I think if we can address, if we agree those are the problems, then staff can come up with solutions for them. But that's just my perception of it. And we saw lots of things like somebody splitting up into 5 different proposals, right? But to me, that's all indicative of this bigger problem of bigger institutions trying to take little bites, as opposed to saying, let's keep it to really not the major players. Let's get the major players out of this pot of money. And that goes, James, to your piece, the innovative little ones, great. As long as you're not, now if you're a big university and if you have an innovative idea, great. Go to one of the other pots of money, which is set up to give a bigger grant. So that's, if those two are the problems, then I think staff can come up with solutions. But that's just how I framed it.
Yeah, and I would have to agree somewhat there, as this money pot gets bigger. What is, and again, I'm going to go back to the staff maybe define what small grants. You know, what does small grants mean? Does that mean smaller organizations and because of the dollars? But where is that funding source and dollar cutoff that, you know, where are we going to get the best bang for our dollar?
Well, $5,000.
Yeah. Where's the best bang for the dollar? Is FI, and I'm not picking on FIT, so please don't take that as it, but 5,000 to FIT, they don't even know it's there. $5,000 to grassroots school effort is huge. And where do we get the best bang? Is this an education-based small grants program, project-based, you know, what, or both, or all?
So NEPs all around the country have small grant programs, and we modeled ours on the one that Tampa Bay does. The intent of the small grants program is to fund projects that are basically educational or engagement oriented. So we're engaging people about the watershed. So that's the primary focus, is engagement. We included restoration projects and those kinds of things in ours. And that may be something we want to talk about at some point also, but it's there for now. And I'm not disappointed with having it there because we've got some good projects out of that. But the main focus is engagement for the public about the watershed. And the intent of small grants is to hit the groups that you don't ordinarily hit. So it would be things like schools, you know, where if a school wanted to have a garden filled with native plants, you know, where they could do fertilizer education or you know, not using fertilizer as part of your landscaping. Those kinds of projects are perfectly intended and the target of what a small grants program should be. You know, funding salaries, funding, you know, overhead for universities. I think that's outside of where small grants is designed and intended to be. But we have not said anything specifically in our criteria. So if we want to exclude that stuff, then we need to say it. And, you know, we're happy to develop something and bring it back to you all if that's the way to go, but we'd kind of like to get some kind of an impression of where you all are, and then we can design something around where this committee wants to go.
Kayleen, this is Graham Cox here, just to weigh in on the day in the life project stuff. I suggested that 75,000 is a number just out off the top of my head and out of thin air. I have no idea what it costs. If we go to Missy and to Orca and say, as an institution, we support what you're trying to do here, but we think there's a better source, probably a more reliable source. If we go to a foundation, this thing's going to go for some years, I'm guessing. So we might well be giving them help to find a foundation that says, yeah, they like the idea, and we take it out of the Lagoon Council's granting thing.
Yeah, understood, Graham. Where we would not be supplying them with the funding, but we could give them a grant writer to go chase a larger pot of money.
That's right. Like, you know, some assistance to find a foundation or an individual who would say, yeah, I'll chip in $50,000 to just make sure that this program continues, because it's over time that the data they collect and the education that they do is really going to count.
Can I get clarification on something just for my own brain? And maybe Jesse, maybe you can answer this. Is Missy doing a day in a life alone, or is she doing that as an employee of Orca? Is it truly an Orca function?
I thought it was a separate entity under SEA a difference organization, which I believe is a nonprofit. Because she started it up in New York and then brought it down to Florida when she moved here.
Okay. I just thought it was important to throw that out there because I don't, if it's a standalone entity, I don't want anybody to think it's a part of a much bigger entity.
Now, let me double check real quick, but I'm pretty sure.
No, you're right, Jesse. That's what it is.
Thanks.
What would happen if after 3 years of supplying a small grant to an operation like, you know, a day in the life or whatever, we suggested that we help find a different grant source for that project. And so there wasn't, you know, an ongoing small grants program for the same project for more than 3 years in a row.
So you're saying fund them, or, you know, so everything.
Fund
is
them
based
for
on-
3 years or rank them for 3 years. And then if they've, you know, been successful for 3 years, then perhaps help find a grant that would keep some ongoing funding for them.
Was that saying that programs are only eligible to receive grants 3 years consecutive?
Well, they have to be successfully granted. I mean, I don't think that would preclude a project from applying for more than 3 years if they had not gotten grant funding from the small grants program for 3 years, consecutive 3 years.
Yes, I understood that. I'm just making sure that I'm hearing it right, that if they get it for 3 years in a row, then we help them look for a source of income year 4 on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think just to add this in so everybody's clear on it. Even if we were to fund a day in the life for $5,000, that doesn't really touch all of the need that is out there for that program. So if you recall, during the proposal period, there were several schools that applied, and really the need for a program like that is transportation costs. That's what they were asking for. We're, you know, funding buses and subs to have in the classrooms for the teachers that are going to go to the lagoon with these field trips with their kids. So the $5,000 that we would award in a small grant to Day in the Life doesn't really, it won't touch the full needs of the program. So we'd sort of be back where we were anyway, with wanting to fund something that isn't in the right pot of money. So I just need you all to be thinking about that too.
Kathleen, there was a great variation in the cost. Some were asking for several hundred, some were asking for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000.
Correct.
So and you're right, it was paying for transportation, it was paying for teacher sub folks, but there's got to be a way we can say, look, here's the big pot of money you apply for, but our main focus will be on finding them the money so they can continue the program, if it is a useful program for the lagoon. I think it is.
Can I also add just kind of another food for thought in this conversation? A Day in a Life is a great program, but I want to point out something that's kind of not being talked about, and to me it's kind of being overlooked. We have two other organizations that offer programs for kids. One is Lagoon Quest, that's founded and run by the Brevard Zoo, and the other one is Wesley Island Eco Camp. So I don't want to lose sight that there's other organizations other than just A Day in the Life out there offering some great opportunities for our kids.
By putting Day in a Life into a separate category, though, you're making space for those other applications.
Well, perhaps not. So the one I'm familiar with is Wesley's Island Eco Camp. That is a summer camp program. That would not be citizen science. So that, you know, I think Wesley's Island is best left in small grants.
Yeah.
But, you know, if we're thinking about perhaps moving a separate RFP for citizen science, then Day in the Life would certainly be one, you know, like probably the primary one that I would be interested in having apply for that. Now, are they guaranteed to get it? No, because there are other organizations that have ongoing citizen science programs. So it would depend on, you know, we can't, as a government organization, just say we're going to fund day in the life. We can't do that with public money. So there has to be a process that's fair and open to anybody who wants to apply.
That's why I said go and find them a foundation that will back it.
Mm-hmm. And we can certainly do that, but that, you know, we could do that tomorrow with a phone call, and we you know, depending on what Dwayne says, we can do that, you know, almost immediately with our grant writers.
Keith,
did you want to weigh in, Dwayne?
Keith, did you have something you wanted to say? I thought I saw you trying to talk there, but you were muted.
Well, I think the point that Kathy just made is a good one. I saw a day in the life as different than, let's say, Lagoon Quest, because potentially it's an event that happens across all counties in the IRL. There are a couple of organizations like ourselves that do. And so that it sort of was this universal and this universal funding for schools to spend a day in a lagoon. Kathy, you point out a good point that there might be a conflict to say, hey, a day in the life is supported. But I love the idea of a dedicated fund outside of small grants that supports schools bringing their kids for one day into the lagoon, sort of thing. And again, I think you guys have a better sense of it. But I wasn't suggesting it's a simple $5,000 grant. I was thinking it's a separate funding, maybe, I don't know, 25,000 would cover it, that you pull out. And as you said, schools literally can apply for busing to bring their kids to lagoon programs. That would be another way to frame it up, pull it out of this. And it could be a first come, first serve. If you're taking to a legit program and until the busing money runs out, that's a very targeted, dedicated thing that could serve a lot of schools. So.
Kathy or Kayleen, can you remind us of the criteria for the standard grant program? Because maybe what we could do is lump all of the day in the life applicants into one pot that would be evaluated on that larger scale than rather than the small grants.
Well, Kayleen, why don't you call that up? And I'm just going to say what I'm thinking right now. I don't think there are any criteria that would, right now, that would allow us to do that, Frank, which is not to say that we can't amend that for next time. I'm not sure logistically how we could do it. And we might need Daniel to weigh in, or Dwayne, on, I'm not sure that's a workable solution for this issue, just based on how we have to do procurement. Dwayne, I see your hand is up. Do you want to say something?
Oops, wait, Dwayne, you muted yourself.
Sorry, I had to drop off to take a phone call from Washington, D.C. But I was listening to your conversation. It's not an immediate solution, but it is something to think about. So if you begin to split where you have a small grants program, kind of uniquely targeted to small grants, if in fact the CAC wants to expand its oversight, I guess, for lack of a better word, into the larger kind of citizens and student and environmental education world, there is no reason that we couldn't bring recommendations from the CAC, you know, through the management conference, and the first appropriate time to start doing that would be probably in the November meetings when we start planning fiscal year 2022. But for example, if you wanted to, you know, have a certain pool of money for transportation, and I'm just throwing this out as an example, if you wanted to have your small grants more narrowly defined, and if you wanted to have an RFP, you know, that was specific to existing program recurring needs, you know, they still be competitive, but you will have kind of begun to, what I would call, craft a portfolio of projects, you know, funding opportunities for projects to meet the needs that you all see within the watershed. So this really, you have kind of an open window to think this into a strategic longer term position. And so I encourage you to have this discussion. I think it's great. And then whatever you all recommend, you know, with Kathy and Kayleen, you know, we can, if in fact this means putting more money into kind of that education piece of our budget, then we'll have to bring that through the whole management conference, like any of our decisions, and say, okay, this is what CAC would like to see. You know, what does the management board think? What does the science advisory committee think? You know, and then try to craft a consensus as to, you know, how do we kind of move those opportunities. With that said, one last thing though is, you know, 2022 is going to be an interesting year for all of us because of COVID. And so, you know, our biggest worry right now is not, you know, we're working hard to expand revenues, but we're also working hard to prepare for the possibility that we're actually dealing with way less money than maybe we've got this year. And so you all just ought to be cognizant that your discussions ought to be about where the greatest needs and the greatest opportunity for the CAC to meet those needs. So that's just a couple of thoughts, but it's a great conversation.
Well, Dwayne, you know, going back to the question, you know, defining small grants, we can cut a lot of it. Do we want to be, and this is just to throw out for the talk, do we really strongly want to make it education based? In a few other organizations that I'm in, part of the talk was, hey, the kid that's 12 and 15 years old, in 10 years, he's 25 years old and part of, you know, the community and the workforce. So 10 years is just a blink of an eye. The hardest thing is to change people's behavior or get them on that track. So are we more interested in, because it's small grant, to be education based? Or are we more interested in, and I'm going to use the term project based, to be like clams and oysters and stuff of that nature? Where do we want to see the strongest emphasis put on?
Personally, I'd like to see more emphasis put on education, because I feel that as the NEP education funding has been dwindling to where I don't really know if we can even apply as Marine Discovery Center for any sort of citizen science project that doesn't have a turn dirt aspect to it. It is important for us to have those small grants, and we're already figuring in-house how we can apply for it next year to do some sort of grasses and classes. So while I understand where Keith is coming from, that we do have these larger nonprofits that can find money elsewhere, this is also really helpful for those smaller projects that just need a couple $1,000s to get started for materials. So I'd hate to see it go to just a project restoration based, because I feel like we already have funding for that.
I agree with you there. I'm just been involved in this organization and, you know, the restoration projects with my city and so forth. The biggest thing I see is the education of people, so that we don't continue doing the same thing over and over. And then on the project end of it, we've got to find ways to get pollution out of the water, whereas if we educate them not to put it in the long run, are we better off? So that's why I'm a little more geared to the education from the standpoint, when I look at the term small grants, where can the best benefit the lagoon?
I agree, but I also think that rewarding people who are doing something different is really important, and trying something new and innovative. And I think that's part of why I'm a fan of this idea of limiting it to about 3 years. And then if it's successful for 3 years, then either we can, you know, recommend a different funding source or help them get grant money for that.
I'm not opposed to the innovative projects. I think that's a great idea as well, to be able to do some sort of community research project. Like, we received the funding to test the oyster cores next to the oyster bags,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
project would not have been possible without the small grants.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is education and innovation seems to be 2 points that, you know, people seem to want to make sure is part of the small grants.
But also community. I mean, I think if a community is interested in doing something, you know, restorative, then they should also be available to get the small grant.
So look, James, let me just, so I'm getting this right. So a city like mine, Satellite Beach, if we're doing something, is this a funding source for me? Or am I really better off going to St. John's and these other grants where that cities have that ability to get dollars? Whereas
I would say more the HOA or the smaller community effort that is separate from the municipality.
Thank you. Okay, because a municipality like us, I think personally, we clog this up here, that we shouldn't be coming to you to do to this for a $5,000 grant. We should be going to St. John's and others for big grants on things. So again, yes, community based, I like too.
Because I remember when this grant first started, one of the key goals was to get HOAs involved. Because the idea was that in the HOA property, maybe they have this public lake that needs some restoration, but one of the local nonprofits or the state agency couldn't do it. So the HOA could come together and apply for these funds to be able to restore it. And I haven't seen that yet. I don't know if the HOAs don't know that it exists or if they don't know how to band together to make it happen, to get their plants. But I thought that was the point of the restoration part of this, was to have those smaller ones come together and get the funds.
Yeah, and we did talk about that initially. Sadly, HOAs are a tough nut to crack. A lot of them don't want to hear about anything that has to do with anything other than what they have, or, you know, we've all dealt with HOAs. We know what that's like. So it's tough.
So do we reallocate those funds that were going to be used for turn dirt restoration and try to put more of an emphasis on education for next year?
I don't know that that's going to happen. There's not a lot of appetite on our board for anything other than turn dirt.
I meant within the small grants, I guess.
Oh, within small grants. Well, so the eligibility criteria are on your screen. You should be able to see that, right? And so this was what our first pass at it. And I guess, you know, we have the reaction buttons here. So we could use those and just kind of go through and see if, you know, who's for keeping education in there, who's for keeping restoration in there. We can do that just to kind of give us an idea of where folks are. And those of you who are being quiet, if you have something to add, please do. This is the time.
But before we get too far away from the day in the life discussion, I liked Wayne's suggestion here, and it sounds like most of us were in support of that program. The way he was talking about bubbling that idea up through the other committees, maybe a recommendation from our committee would be that we support the Day in the Life program. We believe that it should be funded, but we don't believe that it should be funded through the small grants program, and that by bubbling it up through the other committees, we'd specifically ask for the finance committee to be looking at a non-small grants source to fund that program in future years.
I think that's a great idea, Greg.
If I might jump in on that, it's a great idea, but remember, we have very strict governmental procurement policies. And, you know, the basic tenet of that policy, you kind of don't pick winners and losers unless you've got a competitive procurement process. And so if we do this for one group, then you start adding all the groups who'd like to have that kind of long-term support. And it starts to transition a national estuary program into almost a grants support program without actually getting the grants. So we have a grant writer right now, 3 of them in fact, that are available to any entity, including all of the NGOs. If you want somebody to write a grant, all you have to do is ask us if it meets the CCMP. We will not only pay for that professional grant writer, but we hand that grant writer over to that organization to do whatever that organization needs to do in a specific proposal. And so in that case, we provide a service that is open to everybody. It's first come, first serve. And in fact, we've never actually spent out that budget line item, which is shocking to me. But I'll tell you the one performance metric I like. We spent $6,000 on behalf of the Brevard County Save Our Indian River Lagoon program, gave them a grant writer who generated 1.26 million for them. But I don't know, Kathy or Kayleen, have we ever had a nonprofit actually ask for grant writing support? Maybe up in Volusia,
Yes.
1 or 2.
No, MRC is using the grant writer right now for LID.
Right.
Riverside
handbooks.
Conservancy.
Yeah, so we've had
Yeah.
a couple, but it's not like we've been rushed for that service. And it's a free service. So what my comment was to Greg's is that, if you want to, increase the pool of money beyond what we currently budget for. We budgeted $25,000 for fiscal year 1920. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I think we're at $25,000 for, 21.
Yep.
Come November, we're going to start budgeting for fiscal year 2022. And so as you begin to identify the needs from the CAC in that community, and you compartmentalize them into these, what I would call competitive units, there's absolutely no reason you couldn't recommend and request that you would like to see, this budget for, and I'm going to call them small grants in general. And then you've got categories that may be in separate RFPs, or it'd probably be easier to do it as separate RFPs, but you may call it something else. The IRLNEP CAC, grants for education, and you got small grants. You have support for recurring programs that have proven success, and so you could partition it in a number of ways once you decide kind of where that best need and how that all sorts. And we're happy to take that forward. Kathy in particular has been strongly supportive for the 5 years that, we need to be putting more money into education. It has not, she is right, it has not been a priority of our board, mainly because they're responding at the time to, catastrophic algal blooms, fish kills, and cyanobacteria. But, we could easily double the money that's available to these CAC type education programs and make the case to the management conference and the board that's what we want to do. So really, you guys get to drive this. And I suggest you, be innovative and a little bold in what you want to do.
Further input?
So, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, I think a lot of people's concern was that there were multiple requests for things like transportation for an individual school to an existing program, a day in the life program or something like that, and maybe some disparities because they were graded differently because of how good they were at writing the proposal, not necessarily that one school is more deserving than another. I mean, I think we can come up with independent criteria for that, where there is disparity among schools, among public schools as to need. I mean, I've with the schools my children have attended in Indian River County. The magnet school was a totally different world than the regular public middle school in terms of the ability for them to go on field trips, the ability of the parents to kick in $20 to send their kids to something. The ability of the PTAs to fundraise for these types of extra things. So I think there is disparity among schools, to be honest with you. And, my my view is that the funding should go to those that would otherwise not do it, that would otherwise not have that opportunity. You know, there's Title IX schools, that's one criteria. You know, the number of children who would have free and reduced lunch, that's a very common kind of cutoff criteria for things among schools to determine where needs are. You know, or percentage of kids that are on free and reduced lunch. We can ask that question if it's a school that is applying. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And factoring that into the decision-making process.
Adam, you are muted if you're trying to speak.
Sorry about that. Would recreation also be considered something that would be eligible for this? I have I work with a school called Willoughby in Martin County, where I take at-risk kids and we teach them windsurfing, sailing at the U.S. Sailing Center in Martin County. And of course, the school is, you know, they're limited on their budget as to transportation and what's needed to get these kids, you know, to and from school. But the way that it works, if the kids go to school and they don't skip and they're there all week, then they can come out to the program. We teach, you know, most of these kids don't ever have an opportunity to visit the Indian River Lagoon. So it's something new for them. We get them out there, they learn a lot about it. And it's an empowerment type of thing for kids that would not be empowered. And one of the biggest obstacles that they have is funding, because again, it comes down to transportation to get the kids to the club and to get them back when it's done. Other than that, that's pretty much the big expense. Would that be something that the U.S. Sailing Center can apply for this type of grant? Or even
Sure, as long as the kids are engaged in something having to do with the lagoon, sure.
Yeah, it is. It's all part of the, I can't remember the name of the program. You guys probably know it off the top of your heads. But the idea is to get them out there and to teach them, you know, responsibility on the water, teach them a little bit about the lagoon and how it, you know, how we impact it. And I'll pass that information on to the teacher that I work with. And I'll also pass it on to Alan Jenkinson, who is the operations director at the U.S. Sailing Center in Martin County.
I don't remember U.S. Sailing Center ever applying.
Yeah, you know, I passed this to him when you guys sent me the you know, the information up front, and I told him, I said, you should take a look at this, because you know we're constantly having to deal with issues. In fact, we just stopped the hardening of the Hobie Beach, and you know, we were successful in having a soft solution so that we didn't lose that particular beach. And I'll talk to them about it, because I think that this is right up their alley. And it is a nonprofit, and it works through the Martin County Parks Department and everything else, because it's at Indian Riverside Park.
Yeah, ARC was one of the programs that might also be useful to look at.
I'll make sure that everybody is on board with this, and that way, if they can get moving, it'd be nice to have them involved.
I mean, I also want to kind of go back to something that Keith said at the beginning, which was potentially limiting the applicants to organizations with, you know, no professional staff, or maybe limited number of professional staff, plus something like public schools, essentially. I actually like that idea.
So it sounds like you guys want to also maybe add an ineligible list. That might help, because you have your eligible list. You might want to have an ineligible list. And then, I mean, this is for much larger RFPs, but some of them, other grant awarders do limit an organization to, say, 3 RFPs or 3 entries. So then that way that organization has to do its own internal competition, but that's for mostly much larger RFPs. So
it'd be 3 per year, or 3
per
forever.
Yeah, 3 per that award.
That session
category. That's just some other ones. That's not necessarily what we have to do.
So other comments, either supporting or not supporting of that?
I just wonder, I mean, there may be an organization that that is really quite large, but has one lagoon-oriented project that they want to get funding for. And I wonder whether we're making a problem for that organization. If we do a sort of a size limitation on organizations that are permitted to apply.
I agree. I'm not trying to pick on FIT at all, but I do know that I feel like we're having this conversation because they did apply 5 times and got 5 awards for essentially $25,000, right? But if they had just applied for one because they needed like one Lobo in the Lagoon,
Right.
I would have been fine, approving that. I don't think that there's any issue with it. So maybe instead of limiting the size of the organization, if we can limit how many applications each organization can put in, we won't have that issue next year.
I kind of agree with somewhat on that, because what I hate seeing is an organization that has the power to get funding greater than a lot of these small organizations like schools or small community clubs that are doing things. And to me, I have stuck in my brain small grant, trying to get as much bang for the lagoon, one lagoon, as possible out there, where I believe organizations like Marine Resource Council, FIT, Harbor Branch, they have an awful lot of staff and an awful lot of ability to apply for grants, where a lot of these other places really don't. So that's where when I look at the small grants,
I would be willing to
hear
limit
schools, teachers, clubs. So
I can see that.
I would be willing to limit any one entity from submitting no more than 2 applications per year
For a small grant.
for a small grant. Yep.
So what's the feeling, 1 or 2 for folks?
2.
How many people say 1? Just use the reaction on the bottom of your screen.
I don't see that.
You're asking for 1, correct?
1, yeah, 1 at this time. How many people say 1?
I don't think my reaction's working, so I'm just going to
I
give
see
you
it.
But what if the grants are for different things? So, what if one's for education and one is for, I don't know, some kind of cleanup or some maybe
Right,
replanting?
but we're talking about how, limiting the ability of organizations to be pigs at the trough.
Gotcha.
Well,
So you'd have to do like an internal competition with that organization to say, what's our priority? What do we want? What's our main focus for our organization? And then they can decide, yeah, this one's more important to do the education, or this one's more important to do the restoration. And then they submit it to us.
Well,
And how many people think that? Sorry, go ahead.
Do we have a limit on how many grants we give out? And are we reaching that limit?
We have many more applications than we have money.
Okay.
And that grows, I think I'm right here, that's been growing every year.
Yes.
Yes.
This year we had $25,000 available, and we had requests in excess of $138,000.
which is part of the reason that I was hoping to move the day of the life out of the small grants program, because I can see as that becomes more popular, we're going to have increased problems funding some and not others. And we all agree it's a worthwhile program, but it just shouldn't be in small grants.
Right. And some of these grants I'm looking at are $500. So,
Right.
For somebody to put in for a $500 grant when, they are blowing their chance at the 25,000, maybe we should make it a financial number. So, up to a certain amount of money as opposed to how many. Because if somebody wanted to put in for 3 grants or 4 grants at $500 or $1,000, it's not the same as somebody who's getting 3 or 4 $25,000 grants.
Well, and it's $5,000 limited anyway. So
Okay.
An institution that had 2 shots at it would get $10,000.
Okay.
And each grant is rated on its own, so separate from any other request. So it's not like, you know, I don't know, let's use FIT. You know, they put in 5. Each of those is rated independently of the others. And then at the end, it's wherever things rank is where they rank. So if their grant writer, you know, wrote 5 outstanding grants and they rank 1 through 5, then, you know, they get all of them.
Right.
I mean, you're gonna naturally, like, a good grant writer will make it look good, right? And so, you know, and I think that's the effect that we're seeing, is that the larger organizations that put together the more complete and polished package gets ranked higher by us because it looks better. The impacts are clearer and such. And that's, I think, what everyone's concerned about, is that, you know, these small grants are going, not entirely, but largely to these larger organizations that can put together a nice package, as opposed to the more grassroots organizations that I think a lot of people in their heads is what the purpose of this program was.
Great.
Yep, I agree.
Yep, agreed.
Great.
So just to put the dot on the I and the cross on the T, is anybody for limiting it to 2? So let's just see the hands on those if you use your reaction.
So how many again?
As opposed to 1 or 2 or fewer.
The first one we voted for was 1, and I think I counted 8 hands for that. So, and I'm counting 2 for 2 at this point.
I'll raise my hand for the 2.
Okay, so 3. Okay. And I just want to direct your attention to the eligibility here. So I think we all agree that teachers in schools should stay at the top of that list. Community groups and organizations belong there, yes. And I'm just going to run through this. If anybody objects, just shout out. So community groups, clubs, and organizations like your scouting groups, civic groups, churches, etc. HOAs, any objections to those staying on the list?
I kind of do. You ever deal with them, they're tough. And
Oh yeah.
I think it better use some money somewhere else.
Is there concurrence with that? Anybody want to say anything on that?
Kathleen, I agree on the HOAs. Frankly, we haven't had a lot of success with them. Maybe 2 or 3, but otherwise, no.
Neighborhood associations on there, though.
I feel like we should allow them to apply. If they want to apply, then great. That means they can band together and actually agree on something. If they don't apply, then that's okay too. That means there's more funding available for someone else.
You know, I've never lived beachside or anything, but my current condo is the only place I've ever lived that has an HOA. So,
We have
or
a lot.
condo association. So it's not as prevalent away from the water.
We have quite a few of our volunteers that are a part of a big HOA called Venetian Bay up by us. And one of them's the president, and she was trying to get them to band together and agree on doing native plants in their yards instead of the plants that they keep importing. And she was hoping to use the NEP funds to purchase plants, but no one could come together and agree. But if they ever could come together and agree, wouldn't it be great that they were allowed to apply for this funding, is what I'm thinking.
Part of the problem has been that their meetings don't coincide necessarily with the funding timeframe. And so I think one of the problems with small grants is that people are aware of it generally, and then sort of the deadlines catch up to them.
Yep.
I forget the number for Indian River County, but it's either 350 or 700 separate HOAs, and just getting through to them is like running up against the wall.
I don't disagree with that. All right, so I guess we'll keep them on the list, and just leave it there. If they want to apply, they're more than welcome to. How does that sound?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so nonprofit groups. I think we all agree nonprofits need to be there. Do we want to put any, well, let's put it this way. Who feels strongly that we need to limit or apply something more than just saying nonprofit groups? And Keith had suggested earlier limiting the number of employees for the size of the organization, or 1 employee max. Schools and nonprofits, well, entirely volunteer-run nonprofits.
I mean, big schools and colleges.
Well, we've agreed that schools are okay, so we're talking about
Right.
the nonprofits now.
But what about, you know, FAU, FIT? I mean, we talked about limiting them.
Right. I think I want to focus right now on nonprofit groups. Do we want to limit the criteria for that at all?
You can limit the size of the budget. You can limit the number of staff. We only have 2 part-timers on the staff.
I think nonprofit groups are fine. We make the decision with, you know, whatever their application is.
So I'm hearing you don't want to limit, you don't want to apply any limits to the size of the organization, the number of employees.
I kind of like limiting the size of the organization, but I'm okay with a compromise of limiting the number of bites at the apple they can take. So, but yeah, you know, if you have more than 2 or 3 employees, then you're a pretty big nonprofit, at least as far as community-based ones are. So.
Essie?
I don't personally like the idea of limiting nonprofits, only because I have used this funding in the past and I would like to use it in the future. And we're not a huge nonprofit, but we're also not a small nonprofit. However, I mean, as someone who is working in a department that only has 2 people and I'm the only one applying for funding, it's great that I'm able to have this smaller chunk available to apply for smaller projects. It's not as if I can go out for a big multi-million-dollar project. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of see both sides of the coin. Even if a big nonprofit has 25 plus employees, it doesn't mean that they're all talking to each other and the money's going to go out to each department. So I don't know.
All right, so let's just see hands. Use your reaction button again. How many folks want to limit the size of the organization to 2 or 3 full-time employees, or let's say less than 5? Okay, that answers that question.
We've had a standification.
I really think if we're limiting the number of applications per session and we're using the merit of each application to weed it through, then we're doing that, you know, automatically.
Okay. Yep. And so small business or business organizations, any heartburn there? Can we keep them on the list? I don't think we've had any of that happen yet. So.
Well, if we have, then my thing was if we haven't had any, then we maybe don't have it there. I have a hard time giving a small business who makes a profit a grant, when I would rather give it to schools, education, other projects.
Except if their application is really innovative or cool and you know rises to the top ranking, then that would be on its own merit.
Well, my thing is when you're talking about small business who's going to sell that technology to someone else to make a profit, then I have a hard time giving them free money.
Well, that's an assumption I don't think we necessarily can make if a small business applies for it. I mean, if you're talking about doing innovation and research grant, then sure, that maybe is where they're going with it. But, you know, maybe it's a small business that does a community group on the water or something like that.
Or they're greenwashing themselves for a good reason.
Looking at the list here, it says homeowners and neighborhood associations. Those, you know, homeowners, I think is, you know, yeah, we all, if you live on the water and you clean it up and, you know, I don't know if, I think that could be asking for trouble. Neighborhood associations, I think that anything that's not right on the Indian River Lagoon could be, diverting money away from the lagoon. I don't understand, with
Yeah, I agree
HOA.
with that. And the impetus for that was so if you had an HOA that was right on the water and they wanted to do something, that they would be eligible to apply.
I think that, I think that would, if we had a waterfront committee and, everything had to be based on waterfront for whatever this money goes to, I'm sure that there's people writing grants to clean water coming to the lagoon and stuff like that. But, we're not talking about a huge amount of money. But I think that the scope of it being schools, nonprofits, I kind of agree with the small business thing, unless they have, if they're writing an application, then we'll be able to weigh that out and we'll be able to root out whatever doesn't fit.
Right.
Because, not all small businesses.
And that's a really good point for everybody to keep in mind that, you will have the ability to root out the ones you don't like during the review process. So, we could keep eligibility loose, and it looks like we're sort of heading in that direction. And then just, do a tighter job during the review process of weeding out the ones that you really don't like, or, which don't
I
really
think
belong.
geographic proximity to the lagoon could be a big problem because everything's connected to the lagoon.
Correct.
I don't think we need to worry about that until we see it.
Okay.
Well, they'd have to prove it, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. They'd have to prove the worth of what they're doing in order to show the impact on the lagoon.
Right, and you would do that during the proposal process.
Right.
Here's my project, and this is the impact that it's going to have, and we expect X number, this result.
So it really comes down to your staff and how many applications you want to go through, because this is really going to be
staff doesn't take any part in the review process at all. For those of you who don't know this, we don't review proposals at all. We look at them and we send them to you, and it's your job to review them.
Okay, let's limit it.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm not opposed to limiting small businesses in any way, other than the fact that it just seems like a small business can do a lot of the same things that the other groups could. And it may not be core to their business. Again, there's an assumption there that they're developing a for-profit technology, and that's, $5,000 isn't going to get you anywhere. As someone who comes from research funding background.
Yeah, and the reason that made it onto the list in the first place was to accommodate, say, like a ecotourism operation that wanted to develop an after-school program for kids. So should we pay them as a private business if they're taking kids on the water? Maybe. So I think it was just to accommodate businesses of that type.
I don't think we should exclude.
Kathleen, I'd like to weigh in on the homeowners associations.
Sure.
I think that most homeowners associations are in the upper echelon of the socioeconomic status. And I think that we might be subsidizing landscaping for people who don't really need help paying landscaping, when that money could go towards nonprofits or teachers, things like that.
Kathy?
Yes.
I'm going to weigh in on that, having been I'm sitting in a condo association as we speak as a renter. So when you start thinking about kind of homeowners associations, small business, I often think beyond the project and think about what that 5-year, 10-year programmatic value of the extended value would be. And so there's two ways you can kind of partition this. You could exclude certain groups on the front end. You could qualify those groups on the front end, and I'll give you an example of something to at least contemplate. Or you, in your review process, start to ask a very simple question about urgency, need, and value. So I'm going to use my homeowners association right here. And they charge everybody $500 a month. They're sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars of surplus cash just in case they need it. I look at the limited amount of money within the National Estuary Program and have a hard time kind of reconciling that and also with a small business. But I don't have a hard time if I qualified it and said, you know, we are open to homeowners associations who are working with a nonprofit, comes in as a partnership. Or we're working with a small, you know, we'll be willing to do a project with a small business if they're working with a nonprofit, because you get value propositions at two levels. The quality of the project, but now you're putting the private sector in a partnering position with the independent nonprofit sector. And very often those relationships grow. You know, so it's like planting a seed. You know, we may not in a condo association be thinking about getting our lawn, but you know, if we were living and breathing a project with, I'll use Marine Resources Council as an example, you could see a culture shift as opposed to just having the homeowners association kind of driving it, just, you know, give me 5,000 so I can buy some plants. And you know, we'll, because we can get the 5,000, we're going to make sure they're natives. Yeah, it's a good project, but I don't see any programmatic value down the line. But I think you could get to that through your review process and not kind of at the front end of exclusion. But it is something to think about where you're taking the private sector and coupling them with that NGO sector, because most NGOs are making their monies from individual donors. So a secondary value would be that if you're incentivizing in a project a relationship between a for-profit and a nonprofit, there's a really reasonable chance if it goes well, that will also create a donor base that lasts beyond this project for that nonprofit. So just something to think about, but I think you could do that all in the review process. But you know, watching limited public funds kind of go back to the for-profit sector, I just think there's some challenges there in the value proposition.
Yeah, I personally, I always weight the partnerships and the endorsements highly when ranking a project. And I think perhaps if there was a way to do that a little bit more mechanically, that might be a benefit.
Yeah.
Make a distinction too between an HOA and a neighborhood association, because they're wildly different animals, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
A neighborhood association is you know, usually does not have dues, or their dues are like $5 a year or something like that, and it's more of a group of people just trying to improve the community, which is, and doesn't have a bunch of rules regarding what you do with your house and things like that. Again, I've been a member of many neighborhood associations, several in Indian River County, but HOAs and condo associations are different animals than that. And so neighborhood associations oftentimes aren't incorporated in any way. They're just, it's
Right.
just a true legal association. And so, you know, again, I wouldn't want to cut that off. I have no great love for HOAs and condo associations. So even though I'm in one now, so, but yeah, I think what a lot of what Dwayne's saying is true is that we don't, or what Dallas was saying was true, is that we don't want to necessarily subsidize their landscaping. But I think neighborhood associations are a different animal than that, though. So.
Okay, so what I'm kind of hearing is that we're going to leave those in, perhaps build some criteria around encouraging partnerships between for-profit organizations versus nonprofits. And then the last thing, local governments and agencies, do we want to leave those in?
That would be the one issue that I have is local governments. I think municipalities may want to go to a different funding source.
Okay, other comments?
Yeah, I agree.
Adam, you're muted.
My phone keeps ringing every time I talk. Is it one of you guys? So with my, one of the things I've been working on, and I talked to Dwayne about it, is the soft solutions. We've got a lot of places in the lagoon that have been hardened over the years by the engineers of each community, each county, each municipality. And, they've created problems as far as access to the lagoon. And so I've been working on a program to have a softer solution rather than a hard solution when it comes to fixing the shoreline at these places where people can gain access and learn more about or recreate at the lagoon. It's the municipalities that are in charge of this. So there's marine or the coastal engineers, or the county engineers. There's all kinds of engineers out there, and they all have these great ideas to dump rock on everything. And I think that if we can bring them in on something like this with a soft solution, which is basically beach quality sand, it would be something that falls within this type of funding, because it's not that expensive to dump truckloads of beach sand as opposed to drop boulders from the Carolinas. So I would say that, in dealing with the coastal engineers in Martin County, the park engineers, it always comes down to funding and permitting. And of course, sand is a lot easier to get a permit for than it is to dump a load of rock into the lagoon. So I think that from that perspective, knowing that there's a limited amount of resources for these engineers or these counties, municipalities to tap into, that we shouldn't just say no to this. Because I'll tell you, every time that we have a big storm that comes in, the western side of our shoreline gets damaged. And the access point for a lot of people also gets removed once the rock comes in. And we've seen it happen on the causeways. We've seen it happen all over the place. And I know that there's, a lot of talk about a living shoreline, but what I see is engineers come in and they rip wrap everything. And I'd like to see this program opened up for that type of repair work. And I think that small grants is the way to work with it, because like I said, it's not going to impact the lagoon in a negative way, but these engineers need that resource, and this could give them the money to do that.
Other comments?
Yeah, Kathy, this is Graham Cox. I'd leave the local governments and agencies in if you emphasize the strong volunteer and community involvement part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is everybody's good with that then? So we'll leave them in. And then I think the last thing that we've been talking about that is not on the list, do we want to place any limit on the ability of universities to apply?
I think we limit the number of applications to 1 or 2. I don't know how that vote ended up.
I think there were 8 votes for 1 and 3 votes for 2.
Are there any votes for no limits?
I didn't hear the question.
Does anyone think we should not limit it? Not limit the number of applications for a single organization?
We didn't ask that question, but if anybody has feelings on that, let's hear it.
My feeling is if an organization just is throwing these things out hoping to get something, I'd rather see them do one, really good one than to just throw the win as many as they can and hopefully get something.
Agreed.
Okay, and there's one caveat that I would like to throw out, and you guys can tell me if it works for you or not. If we allow universities to participate, I think that there should be something explicit in the criteria that says they are not allowed to charge overhead.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wouldn't this fall under the teachers, school district, and student clubs? If the universities are getting involved and they have a club or, a class that's interested in doing something that will have a positive impact on the lagoon, do we want to keep them out? As opposed to like Harbor Branch, like he said, throwing everything at us to gobble up all the funds that they can.
I'm not adverse to universities applying. What I am, and I'm not a member of your committee, I'm just staff, and this is just my opinion. But what I am adverse to is a university applying for $5,000 and then taking $2,500 of it in overhead. That doesn't do a thing for the project. It doesn't do a thing for the lagoon. It's just money that goes to the university because they can.
So Kathy, I
agree to that.
I would just put in something that limits overhead, period. Just make it direct project costs for everybody.
Only is the way, again, from a sponsored program standpoint, you'd phrase that. So no indirects.
Okay, anybody have heartburn with that?
Yeah, so no indirects for all of the listings, for not-for-profits and everybody else.
Okay, got it. All right, well, I think that is helpful. We will come back to you next meeting with something on paper and get that to you in time to review for the next meeting, if that's okay.
Okay. Everybody
So
good with
maybe
that?
something in the directions or the application booklet to say, if you have more than one idea, make sure you choose the one that you think is going to be successful.
Right.
Because if we're going to limit to one application per organization, they're going to have to do the ranking themselves first.
Right, exactly.
Which I think it's going to be a challenge. I mean, it's adding to the bureaucracy rather than cutting through it.
Everybody good with A?
And that's why I think that 2 applications isn't that much more work. I don't think.
All right. Everybody good with A? Enough input,
Yes.
Kathy? You have enough?
Yeah, we do. Thank you.
Okay. We'll go on to B, social media strategy. Kathy, I'm going to mute myself for a minute. I got a call from my city manager 3 times, so I'll unmute when I'm back.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So in your packages, and I'm going to apologize in advance, there is a wicked thunderstorm blowing through here. So if I get knocked off, I'll try to come back on. In your packages, you have the social media strategy that we've been working on with the ideas group. And we are basically proposing a few things. So Facebook is going to be our main channel for information. And we will be pushing out things as they happen, outside of the planned drops that we're going to be doing with that. So Facebook, the demographics on Facebook are trending a little older, and you'll see sort of how they laid all of the case out for each of these channels in their strategy. So families, people with kids, lots of older folks are using Facebook as their main social media now. So that's going to be our sort of main channel for, event information, program news, partner news, partner events, that kind of thing. We will be working on about a 2-week planned media strategy, and then augmenting as things happen and as they come up. Instagram is going to be where the Lagoon photos move to. So we've been posting a photo a day from the Indian River Lagoon calendar. Those are moving over to Instagram, and there will be some content built around those. So no longer will it be just the picture and who took it, but there'll be some sort of poetry or famous quotes or things of that nature that go with it. Just something sort of inspirational, your inspirational photo for the day. That'll be Instagram. Twitter is, and this was a surprise to me, I did not know this, the Twitter demographics tend to be fairly young. So it's millennials and younger. So the Generation Z and millennial folks are mainly the users of Twitter. It's a very young demographic. And so they are doing something new, and this is sort of our fun channel. And the Lagoon is going to be the voice of Twitter. So our Twitter channel is going to be run by the Lagoon. And they have given the Lagoon a whole personality, sort of a fun / crusty, maybe sometimes a little cranky personality. that will go with this. We're not sure how that's going to work out yet. It's going to be pretty novel for a government organization to be trying this, but we're game for it, and they've convinced us that this will help build audience. So we're going to run with it for the time being. So look for that shortly. If you are not following us on Twitter, please do, and please invite us to follow your organizations. And you know, hopefully we'll get this down and make it work. So again, you know, the whole idea behind this, and I think we touched on this before, is that Ideas is really good at building audience. You know, we can put news out, but they can build audience for us, and that's sort of the goal for this whole multi-channel strategy. So again, Facebook is the main page for news and information. Instagram is going to be sort of our artsy, you know, Lagoon focused engagement kind of inspirational channel. And then Twitter is sort of going to be the fun channel that is going to be focused around Lagoon friendly tips and living in a way that, you know, reduces our footprints on the Lagoon. We are going to hang on to LinkedIn, because the Ideas folks thought that, you know, as the business channel, that should be our responsibility. So they're not going to do that for us. We'll continue to keep hold of that. Any questions, anything you saw when you went through that stuff? Kayleen, do you want to add anything?
No, but the only thing I can think of to add on the LinkedIn side, keeping that in-house, it's been kind of fun to watch that grow. We went from when I started with the organization last October to, I think we had 2 followers. It was me and Frank. To today, I think we have 98. So it is slowly building, but we're also getting a nice business presence out there. And I've actually had sidebar conversations with a couple of my colleagues from my past lives, how much they appreciate us posting like the RFP information and whatnot out there. So that one is growing tremendously.
And I don't know if you had it in there, but you know, if you want to recruit some teens to do TikTok videos for you, that is the latest teen.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a lot of material out there already, but there's a lot of teens with a lot of time on their hands this summer, and that will continue through the school year. So
that is an awesome idea. I'm going to take that and think about that.
I would absolutely die if you guys created a TikTok video.
The Lagoon should be TikTok.
But if you have teens, you'll get lots of them. We're doing a TikTok competition right now for the zoo. I think you're going to get a lot. And I think teens love making them, and they're on Lagoon anyway, and that's how you communicate to teens. So
awesome. We will look into that.
Yeah. I can volunteer one teen, whether she wants to or not, if you want.
Great. Thanks. Any other comments? All right. Thank you. And I guess Frank is probably still off, so why don't we move on to the next one? Dwayne, this is you.
So this is just a quick update on the big RFP strategy for fiscal year 2022. The IRL Council Board authorized us to go ahead and complete and also advertise RFPs during the fall window. So sometime in that October-November window, which would become the basis for projects for fiscal year 2022. 4 areas, go ahead, next slide. 4 areas had already been identified, had already gone through full review. What we didn't do last time, because we were kind of looking at COVID impacts and trying to get a sense of kind of where we are and where we think we might be by 22. And the reality is we don't have any idea. You know, we're pretty solid, in fact, very solid for the upcoming year. So 2021 will be business as usual. And so we will retain the same target levels for these RFPs in our announcement in fall. So $500,000 for water quality, 200,000 habitat restoration, 200,000 community-based, and then 100,000 science and technology. There's a fair amount of wiggle room, you know, in that community-based restoration. And so what we'll be saying through this process, both in writing and as we interact with our partners, is that, you know, all of this is contingent upon having the available funds to do the grants once we identify and rank those award-winning projects. And we're not going to know that for quite some time. So I anticipate we could be going into our 2022 budget year still uncertain about revenues, because we wouldn't have finished the Florida legislative session. There's a bunch of stuff going on right now up in Washington, which I won't bore you guys with, other than, you know, come fall, we'll be releasing RFPs again and encourage everybody, you know, to put as many applications as you want, you know, to these projects. So that's all I have.
Frank, are you back?
I am back. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I had to step away. Any other questions on Dwayne's report? Okay, moving to part D. Kathy?
Great, yes. So just a quick update on our COVID funding. So we put out 10 internships for bridge grants for folks who were either recent college grads or who had been impacted in some way economically by COVID. And so we had 5 recipients for the funding. And I'm just going to run through and tell you just a little bit about each of them and what they're doing. So Laura Norton is our first one. She is from FAU, recent grad, not able to find work because she needed to be at home like everybody else. She is going to data mine all of our projects since we've become an independent organization. And she's going to be quantifying the nutrient reduction benefits, so TN, TP, TSS, for not only for our own information, but we've been working with the EPA over the past, I don't know, 6 to 8 months on better quantifying nutrient reductions of our projects. And obviously not all of our projects are focused on nutrient reductions, but we'll at least be able to put some number to the ones that have that. So that's going to be good information for us going forward. Claire Crenshaw from University of Alabama is developing metrics for us, mostly for infographic reasons and for, you know, kind of annual reporting about the management conference. So we've been interested in knowing, you know, kind of what the reach of the management conference is, how many organizations are represented, what are their networks like. So it's sort of like a network analysis of the management conference. So she's doing that for us. Naha Murphy is from University of Miami. She is developing an inventory of nature, heritage, and cultural tourism sites. And we had put those out as separate asks for each county. And Naha decided when she came on that she wanted to do the whole lagoon. So she's working on developing that information. I think she's got over 100 sites now, if I'm not mistaken, that she's working on. We have Maria Lombardo from Florida Tech and Painting with a Twist, who is developing a 30th anniversary piece for us. So next year is our 30th anniversary. And she's developing kind of a timeline document that will also include input from all of the past directors of the program. So we had her go back to all of the past directors and find out the things that happened on their watches that they're proud of, and sort of the milestones that occurred while they were director. So that'll be coming out soon. And we're going to try to shop that around as a publication piece and see if we can find somebody to publish that. And if we can't, then we're going to publish it ourselves. But so look for that. That's coming along nicely. And then lastly, Jesse is doing our probably most fun project. We've been briefing the board all this week, and they seem to all agree that this is like the most fun thing that they've seen. So she is dispelling Lagoon myths and mysteries for us. She's doing write-ups for 20 short narratives. And Jesse, you want to talk about this just for a little bit and fill them in on what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So 20 myths and mysteries, and I'm finding some extra little tidbits too I'm going to add into that, and 10 uncommon animals and plants that live in the Indian River Lagoon. So I've gone on Google, I've asked NERT and eCert and some old fishermen in our area, what are some things about the lagoon that you have heard? And probably my favorite one so far is there's an old wives' tale that rubbing mullet slime into your cuts helps to heal them. So I'm excited to dispel that rumor. But we are taking on some more serious ones as well. So talking about cutting a new inlet and whether or not that would actually work, talking about muck dredging and releasing nutrients and that kind of stuff. So it's going to be pretty informative, but I'm looking forward to finishing up that project. It's going to be really cool.
So Jesse, if you want to get to the bottom of this, people have told us at the zoo for years that there's wild introduced population of jaguarundi living around the thing.
Really? Oh, I might have to look into that.
Rock otter-like cat, and every once in a while, someone who knows animals tells me they see one. So
interesting. I'll have to add that in.
Jupiter Island.
Jupiter Island is at the center of jaguarundi.
Well, that's where I've been told they're around, and I think I've seen something that might have been one.
So if you get to the bottom, that would be a really cool tale.
We'll work on that.
We need a trail cam out there.
Yeah, right.
And sawfish, not a mystery, but pretty.
Yeah, so the small tooth sawfish is my #1 animal that I'm working on right now.
Oh, that's cool.
Jesse,
We
do
could
you
have
have
like
some-
a hunt for Bigfoot with a jacaranda.
What is,
The
yeah,
first
swamp.
photo in.
I want to do a swamp ape as one of the uncommon animals of the IRL.
Eating a possum pipefish.
Mm.
I've tried that, Jim. Don't do it.
I've heard people keeping them in their mouth and listening to them pop.
I've done that too. That was a Kerry Clark trick.
Yeah.
All right, any questions on this part?
Just one suggestion for Naja's. Is she reaching out to the members on this committee? Because we might have suggestions in our own counties.
Yeah,
We could certainly have her do that, yeah.
You know what I think I'll do, Kathy, since I'm, overseeing this, is I'll get the draft list and send it to you all. She's only here for a short amount of time, and I want to make sure. So the key for you all is that we didn't miss something really important, because this, there's a lot of places that people would like to see on a list that aren't exactly lagoon oriented. So she's up over 100. I got to give her credit. This was started out to be a single county. She's got 100 sites, and she's going to have to build the database and all the information. So what I'll do is I'll get that to Kayleen. You can see the list. If there's anything missing, by all means, don't use your judgment. Just add it, but can't guarantee that every one of those sites is going to get a full look in the short time we have these interns.
Okay. So we're all good on that. Dwayne, did you do or Daniel, you're up for IRL project updates?
So right now we have 3 projects.
Daniel, stop. You're like Mr. Robot Man.
Yeah, you're fighting froggy voice. You're going to need to go out and come in.
All right, give me a second.
We have learned, y'all, if that happens to you on your Zoom meeting, you either can go out and come back in, or we found out on Tuesday that if you have a headset you can plug in, that'll also override that. Just kind of food for thought.
Fix?
Does an exorcism work also? I'm curious.
All right, Daniel, you're back?
Yeah, is it fixed?
It is.
Yes.
All right, so as you can see, we got 43 contracted projects in progress, 4 of the old small grants in progress. Out of the 7, 6 of them are now under contract. We actually had 1 withdrawn due to COVID. All the field trips got canceled. We have 5 COVID grants that Kathy just covered under contract. And since 10/1, this beginning of the fiscal year, 8 projects are finished and 5 alone in this last quarter. So next slide. The first project that finished was Indian River County's West Wabasso septic to sewer, completed in 2019 of December. They were asking $200,000 originally, and when they got to reimbursement, they only asked for $131,780, so quite a bit under budget. The highlight from this project is they did connect all 101 parcels that they proposed, and they're estimating 3,131 pounds of TN and 500 pounds of TP reduction per year. Next. Randy Parkinson's Climate Ready Estuary supplemental grant that we had. That project was a 2-part project. It completed in March 2020. It was on budget at $52,000. And from that project, the main highlight was that out of all these different stressors, if you boil it down, you would come down to 3 stressors, and 9 different adaptation actions would vastly improve resiliency of the IRL to climate change stressors. Next. Brevard Zoo finished their 2018-2019 Restore Our Shores project. They had some permitting issues, but got all that squared away and wrapped that up on budget in April. Some of the main highlights from that project was over 3,500 plants along 965 linear feet of shoreline were completed. Over 3,000 volunteer hours, 91 community events, and 800 linear feet of oyster reef installed. Next. University of Central Florida finished their shoreline suitability model, phase 2. Phase 1 was kind of just mapping out where all the natural habitat was still in the northern mosquito lagoon and IRL. This phase 2 is to do a model to predict how much of that shoreline could have mangroves persistence. And what they found was only 68% of the shoreline could handle a 50% chance of having mangroves. And that was all due pretty much to the wave height. So windy areas, open areas with a lot of waves, you weren't going to have a lot of mangrove persistence. And they were completed in May and were $127 under budget. FDEP finished their aquatic preserve shoreline restoration Brevard County project in May. They were $652 under budget. Some of the highlights from that was over 1,000 volunteer hours, 220 square meters of red mangroves planted on Brevard County spoil island number 45, and over several other spoil islands, they created 1.5 acres of bird nesting habitat by removing Brazilian pepper and Australian pines. And they started their horseshoe crabbing program in this project. Next. Brevard County finally finished up their channel denitrification project in June of 2020. They were $21,650 under budget. This project is still in progress on their side with monitoring. The highlight was, though, that they installed this bioreactor that does have calcareous rock and charcoal briquettes as a novel way to reduce nutrients.
Where is that exactly in Suntree? Do you know, Dane?
That is in Suntree, off of Wickham. So behind, I think it's, let me see what the exact address I'll have to get to you, Keith, but it's not too far from the zoo at all. So if you keep going down Wickham around the corner, when it takes that south bend, there's like a little Health First facility. It's behind that.
I'll check it out. Oh, I know where that is. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll send you the address so you have it specifically.
I want to look at it.
Hub SeaWorld wrapped up their linking wildlife health to ecological factors in the IRL project. This was done and finished in June 2020, and it was on budget. Some of you may remember having a little briefing a few meetings ago regarding mercury levels in the lagoon. They found that some of the dolphins had the highest mercury they'd ever seen, but selenium may be protective. Another thing they saw was that the isotope of nitrogen from wastewater treatment plants specifically seem to be going down over time. So that is a positive. Next. And Bethune-Cookman finished up their Reed Canal Basin Stormwater Improvement Project in 2019. Don't know the final number on that one yet. Still waiting some backup for the invoice. But they did, as you can see in the before and after pictures below, totally regraded and planted multiple plants in this stormwater park and Reed Canal. And they also hosted a 6-day Protect Our Lagoon Academy back in July of last year.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Daniel? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next agenda, 5F, the State Road 528 update. Good luck, Dwayne.
Thanks, Frank. Many of you may remember that a little over a year ago, the IRL Council, with full support from the Management Conference, passed a resolution on this item. But DOT has been working for a number of years, with the transportation partners, Space Coast TPO, Port Canaveral, and we engaged as an organization because we wanted to make sure that Florida DOT considered Indian River Lagoon impacts on their plan to expand the 4-lane bridge causeway going over Indian River and Banana River from 4 to 6 lanes. It's a very significant transportation corridor expansion. And around 2.5 years ago, we felt that they weren't really looking at all of the options on the table. Next slide. And as a result of concerns, council passed a resolution, and the pertinent part of this is that they requested that DOT look at any and all infrastructure improvements that would benefit the lagoon, the economy, and coastal resilience. So with that, next slide. We started to work with Port Canaveral with direct funding from Port Canaveral, and I'm giving you just the high points of this, to start looking at multiple scenarios of what might water quality look like. Should we pull those causeways out, at least in part at 520 and then 528. And so the bottom line is you can't do one or the other. If you're going to get a flushing and flow improvement, you got to do 528 and then 520. But if you did both, and you can see from left to right that there was significant improvement in flow by doing expansions of, we're calling not high span bridges, but low span elevated, pull some of the causeways back, restore that, Indian River Lagoon bottom that was dredged and filled, 50 years ago, between 9 and 17% flow improvement. And so give you an idea the quality of some of the science going on with just the hydrology. Next slide. In addition to that, I took the next slide on my big presentation out, but we also advised them about sea level rise, that we felt that DOT was not using appropriate methodologies to look at their elevations on the causeways. But anyway, as a result of our hydrological study, St. John's River Water Management District stepped in because the question was asked, well, hydrology and flow improve, but what does that actually mean for water quality? And kudos to St. John's. They put their team to work with a focused effort to take their hydrological model and actually tweak it into a predictive model for chlorophyll A. And so this is just an example of the test run of that new model application. So on the left-hand side, you've got the current condition. And in the right-hand side of your screen, you can see, chlorophyll A concentration. So the higher the chlorophyll, the redder, the less moves towards blue. And the conclusion from that model run and others was that just increasing flow alone did not significantly decrease the vulnerability of Banana River in particular to chlorophyll A in blooms, which is something that, you know, you might kind of just say, well, that's pretty intuitive. Slow flow, microtidal, you know, you still have all of the nutrient loads. It's just not enough to transition you, you know, to an improved water quality alone. The district then said, you know, let's take a look at this from a different perspective and let's load in the nutrient data, the salinities, the temperatures based on TMDLs and BMAPs for Banana River. So we were focused on that hotspot. Next slide. And that's the change if we met the obligation of the BMAP. So the current condition, using that June, you know, we're using the June 2011 super bloom kind of as the test. And you can see in the right that looking at total maximum daily load conditions and the prescribed reductions within that BMAP significantly not only improve condition and this chlorophyll A prediction, but what's really interesting is it was a second validation of Zerillo's hydrology models. So their hydrological analysis fit really well. So I wanted to show this to you because this is part of what an NEP does, that, you know, sometimes you start something and you're not sure where it's going to take you. But we're going to be tomorrow asking permission to put a proposal in to restore America's estuary to take this model to the next step. Next slide. So okay, that's it for that. So where we are right now with DOT is an interesting position. We've provided all this information to all of the, you know, the stakeholders at Transportation and Planning Organization, Port Canaveral. They weighed in on discussions the beginning of the month. The Technical Advisory Committee and the Citizens Advisory Committee of Space Coast TPO voted not to elevate the bridge, but to support DOTs as designed, with the caveat that DOT follow through with increased mitigation. And DOT provided some numbers at this meeting, you know, what it would look like, their traditional approach with stormwater ponds versus an approach to septic to sewer removal and, you know, targeting nitrogen phosphorus reduction. I don't know what's going to happen with this decision. The governing board tabled it because there's some questions still unanswered, including whether their elevation projections are good enough to be protective over a 50-year period. But TPO will be meeting, you know, in September to readdress this issue. And so our work is done as far as supplying the best available science and technology to assist in this discussion. And now it becomes a transportation discussion driven by TPO, Brevard County, Port Canaveral, and Florida DOT. So with that, I'll just open for a couple questions.
Questions for Dwayne? Okay, seeing none. Kathleen, you see any? Okay.
Adam looks like he has one.
Okay.
Adam, you're muted still.
So some of the things that we've seen with these when they change out the bridges and they raise the speeding, you know, the speed limit on the road, is a lot of times we lose access for recreation. Is there anything in this that will guarantee that there will be recreational places with parking for the public on this new causeway?
There is a provision, you know, in the 60% line for public access. It's controlled, it's focused. This is not a very wide corridor. So if you went down there on 4th of July, I mean, that entire causeway was bumper to bumper cars.
I believe it.
A lot of that, what I would call easy pull off the side of the road access disappears when you go 6 lanes. And that was
Right.
part of the presentation I gave, and I believe it's in your packages, I think. I made a case that flow matters, but also these hard armored, high, high elevation, steep sided rebutments create all sorts of havoc with wave refraction, wave reflection, and so we made a pretty, what I think, complete case. But yes, they are going to provide for access, but it's nothing like what's there now. And of course, that is always a consideration, especially for some of our communities that are not, that are disproportionately impacted because, people who are poor aren't going to pay to go park, in Sebastian Inlet, a place where it costs them a lot of money. And so some of these causeways have been the place for people to go to for free with easy access. And unfortunately, with this plan, construction doesn't start for 10 years, by the way. But this plan is going to change access greatly through that corridor. The other side, Adam, is that this is one of the worst corridors for litter in Brevard County. 3-day 4th of July weekend, over 2 tons of litter were picked up on those fringes. So it's always a consideration, and you're absolutely right. The public access is always a challenge with these expansions.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Dwayne?
Yeah, Dwayne, this is Graham Cox, Dwayne. In the mitigation discussion, how far are they ready and willing or able to go when it comes to septic to sewer improvements in that corridor? Can they go quite far afield, or are they restricted to a very narrow area to do that?
That's ultimately what caused the vote to go to table. Commissioner Brian Lober made a very on-target and impassioned pitch that, number one, the partners had not compared that 9 to 17 flow improvement to the, at least the preliminary proposal for septic to sewer. And they need to do that because those septic to sewers are not going to give you the kind of change that you see in the picture that you're seeing right now. Just a partial. The other thing they were talking about from DOT that was troubling was that they were actually saving money, by not, going through their normal traditional wet, dry stormwater. And so they were sent back to the drawing board to at least come up with a mitigation strategy. The one thing I did like about DOT's verbal position, should they go down this pathway to leave it as is, as far as line drawings, is that they said they would be willing to put the money in advance of actual construction to advance those septic to sewer conversions more rapidly and sooner, so you get the benefits. So this is going to be kind of a negotiated settlement, I believe, when they get to permitting, as to what is the appropriate level, how many houses do they actually convert to be an appropriate mitigation for the impacts of this causeway.
Dwayne, how cooperative, maybe I shouldn't ask this question, but how cooperative was DOT when it comes to these kind of discussions? Are they going to say, take it or leave it? Or are they willing to really talk?
Position since day one. If you talk to any city, any county, ask them, how easy is DOT to work with? You'll get the same answer. The fact that we had to spend our money to do this due diligence, it wasn't being paid for by DOT, I think is a perfect example of kind of the challenges we have with infrastructure as we move forward in Florida. I was asked by Commissioner Lober to give them a personal opinion, and I gave that personal opinion, took my hat off as the executive director representing you all, and just made a case for, this is one of the most important corridors in the state of Florida, both because of the importance of Port Canaveral in post-emergency delivery of goods and services, but also because of this emerging commercial launch center at Kennedy Space Center. But they needed to get the decision right with the best available science. And I caution them that, you know, they have two pathways here. One is an incremental decision to add a couple lanes to a 4-lane highway. And the other is a visionary decision, thinking about the legacy of what people 50 years from now may say when they make this decision. And so I have to give Commissioner Glover a lot of credit. You know, had it not been for him taking the floor and making that, you know, very compelling stance, I think this vote could have gone either way. But the burden of, to get to your question, Graham, the burden now, if they decide to go as built or as designed, the burden shifts over to St. Johns River Water Management District in DEP to make a decision about what an appropriate mitigation strategy is.
Is the rail spur being considered as well?
Rail has been off the table for quite some time. It's interesting you brought that up, Jim, because I think Port Canaveral now is realizing how vulnerable their economic base is with so much emphasis on passenger crews. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think any crazy idea is ever dead. And so we're going to need to constantly keep an eye out for transportation corridor ideas. I can tell you that Thad Altman had proposed a bill which didn't get heard, so it didn't go anywhere, to do a feasibility study on a deep water port on the north end of Banana River to serve the Space Center. And so, you know, constant vigilance as it relates to transportation is going to be important, not only as the state grows, but, you know, making sure that the transportation decisions are made with the best available science.
Yeah, Dwayne, the reason I asked the question was we're looking at the DOT widening 510 through Indian River County from 2 lanes with hardly any shoulders to 5 lanes right through the Wabasso community.
Yeah, you're going to see more of that, I think. One thing I can say kind of optimistically and positively, after 2.5 years of weighing in, last few months I've been asked to sit in on some preliminary discussions about DOT stormwater projects, at least District 5. So I think there is a culture shift that's slowly happening.
Okay.
We need to start, these environmental lookarounds are not just about building a roadway. We need to be looking at stormwater. We need to be looking at community access. We need to be looking at sea level rise, you know, and coastal resiliency. And so we just need to be cautiously engaged with all of these road and bridge projects.
Dwayne, you need to jump off.
Yeah, I know. I already told him it might be a little late.
Bye, Dwayne.
You're officially running late now.
Bye, Dwayne.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right,
Dwayne.
thank you. Moving on to number 6, new business, merchandise plan. Kathy and Kayleen.
Let's see. So we have been working with the Ideas folks for a number of years now. They're the people who are doing our social media. They designed our website. And they've been telling us since day one that we needed to do an online store. And we've got about over 100 people. I think it's about 112 now in the management conference. And I don't get through any conversation anymore ever without somebody asking me, when are the t-shirts coming? When are the polos coming? When are the hats coming? So good news, they're coming. We have decided to do sort of a proof of concept for this idea, and we're going to put an online store up if council approves it tomorrow. And we're going to start small. So ultimately, the idea for this is that we're going to seek some kind of a licensing agreement with a company to do it for us, where we don't have to do any of the work to make it go. We just pay them to make it go, and we take a cut of whatever it is that they make for us. So that's the long range goal. In the short term, what we're going to look at, Kayleen, if I could have the next one. this is sort of what we're going for in the short term. We are going to do embroidered polos and embroidered hats, and you can see those there. And then a limited run of t-shirts. So just a couple of colors, one design, just sort of a light one and a dark one. The front of the shirt is going to say One Lagoon, and the back of the shirt is going to have the logo on it. So this is what we're proposing to do our online store with. We're going to do just a short run of t-shirts, polos, and hats. The initial costing for this is $18,800. So we've done our due diligence and priced out sort of where we think we can be to maintain both quality and decent pricing. So the investment is $18,800. We think after sales, we will end up with a net profit of about $20,400, and that can either be rolled back into reserves where we're going to take this from, or be rolled into, figuring out the next steps. And then, ultimately, like we said, we're just going to try to roll this out. If they approve it tomorrow, we're going to do an online store, get it up on the website in time for holiday buying. And hopefully all of you will be purchasing hats and t-shirts and supporting the cause. And we will put it out to the public after you all have a shot at it and see where it goes. And really the impetus for this is just to prove that we have a market for it. If we can prove that, then it makes it much more attractive to go to a licensing company and say, this is what we did, this is how fast we did it, and the market is there. So any thoughts on this?
Questions, thoughts?
Looks good.
I think it's great.
Looks nice, very nice.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it. Next, B, meeting calendar.
So we included the tentative 2021 meeting calendar in your packets. We kind of did our due diligence. We went out, we made sure there was no conflicts with any major events or meetings that were going on. And it's kind of an FYI, if it gets approved, if everybody has a problem with the days, you can let us know. We can kind of rearrange things if need be. It seems since I've been with the organization, this day and time has worked well for most, not all, but most people. So if you foresee a conflict going forward, please let us know.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Please take a look at it and get back with Kayleen and Kathy on it, if you would, if you find an issue. Okay. Everybody good? Okay, move on to Executive Director's report. He left. Are we going to skip him?
He left. I think the only thing he really wanted to have out there is that we are in the WRDA bill, and the WRDA bill is being debated up in Washington, D.C. right now. So reauthorization for the NEP and authorization for appropriations up to $750,000 is on the table right now. So that would be a significant raise for us if we get appropriated at the level that we could be. But everything is still sort of up in the air. The general feeling is that it will, because it's an election year, it will go to continuing resolution. So we won't see that bump up this year, but we might see it next year. Okay. But again, everything is still up in the air. So, it's no news is good news at this point. So we're good so far.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? Any final comments? Okay, I want to say thank you, everybody, for being on. I know it took a while today. Thank you for working on the small grants. I think that's very important. And Kathy and Kayleen, thank you. Thanks to Dwayne and Daniel for putting this together. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Absolutely, you're welcome.
Okay.
And if you have other thoughts as we're going through our weeks, the rest of the week, just send them along to me in an email about small grants or about anything.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Right.
Everybody
Thanks,
good?
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe.